Hello, everybody, and welcome to Friends of the Force, a Star Wars podcast. I'm your host, Brad.
And I'm your host, Sarah.
And this is Andor Candor, where we talk all things Andor on Disney+. And this week we're discussing episode number 10, One Way Out, directed by Toby Haynes and written by Beau Willimon. Oh my gosh. Wow.
AKA one of the best hours of television.
Period.
Definitely
of Star Wars. I mean, holy heck. What a finale to the Narkina 5 arc. Just an incredible, thrilling, gut-wrenching, on the edge of your seat, adrenaline pumping. I'm so excited we get to talk about this episode. We saw it, we got that chance to see it early, and we've been like dying to talk about it because it's so damn good, and now the masses have been seeing it.
Yeah, I every time somebody would mention how much they're enjoying Andor online or in person, I just start to grin like an idiot. I'm like, hee hee, just you wait, besties.
I keep going back to the quote from Diego Luna where he's like, you have to watch Andor. Everybody around you has to see Andor. You have to recommend Andor. And like, honestly, that's been my entire personality for like the last 2 months. And I'm okay with
it. Honestly, I'm so excited to hear that my friends who I was just like weirdly grinning around, like their reaction to this episode, because I'm so ready to talk about it with everybody that I know. But last week I pulled up the receipts of my reactions to episode 9. I have receipts for my reactions to episode 10. Here they go. If you recall, episode 9 was holy shit, man. Lee. Period. Shit. Period. This is so beyond horrifying. Now, on episode 10, we had holy fucking shit, man. Lethan is high-key ruthless. Holy shit, man. This show better get nominated for like every fucking award. Holy fuck, man. That was my deranged tech messages to you at 1:33 in the morning after watching this episode.
Listen, I'm loving this bit. I'm loving the text receipts with Sarah and Brad. I think it's a bit that we should continue.
Don't start that because that can get really dangerous really fast.
True. Okay, so selective, very selective on that. But yeah, we're gonna dive into full spoilers for this episode. So if you haven't seen it, go watch it first. By the time you're listening to this, we should also have our roundtable interview up with writer Beau Willimon and executive producer Sanne Wallenberg, who worked on Andor. So we were both very fortunate and humbled to be a part of that opportunity. So huge thanks to Lucasfilm, but you can go check that episode out right after this because that also includes some episode 10 thoughts and spoilers, etc. So very, very fun opportunity with some amazing people in the community. So a lot of friends of the Force as part of that.
Wow, you really just tied that all together quite beautifully. Yeah, no, it was seriously so cool and such a privilege. And they have some excellent things to say about this arc and the show, and I really highly recommend that interview if you didn't already listen to it before jumping over into this episode. Yeah, we've had to hold our tongue on this episode for a little bit here. How do we start talking about it?
Yeah, well, I mean, speaking of the interview, I will say one thing that they talked a lot about was sacrifice, and maybe that's somewhere where we can start. I think sacrifice is a through line of the arc from Toby Haynes and Beau Willimon. This episode in particular really puts that on display. And I think what I love the most about this episode was seeing what each person's sacrifice means. Like, we've had this idea of each person has their own form of rebellion, which sort of was the crux of the Aldhani arc, right? Like, Cassian is rebelling on Aldhani, Mon Mothma is rebelling on Coruscant, etc. And now we kind of see like everybody has their own form of sacrifice. Like Mothma, is she going to make the sacrifice? Is she going to marry off her daughter? Cassian is sort of sacrificing his way of life because he is now a prison escapee. And he literally just escaped prison with Melshi. So like, what are they going to do? Like, they obviously can't go back to their normal life. They're in this together. And also Luthen, like we get to hear a little bit from Luthen in one of the most powerful monologues I've ever heard in Star Wars, and a performance in a 2 or 3 minute scene that is worthy of an Emmy, because holy shit.
That speech, man, Beau Willimon, give that man his trophy. and then gives Stellan Skarsgård his trophy as well, because holy moly, does that monologue have some text, some meaty, delicious text?
What was really evident to me is that rebellions are not only built on hope, but they're built on sacrifice. So, what are you willing to give up in order to enact change? Because change doesn't happen by sitting idly and hoping the change happens. Like, you kind of have to, like, hope is very important, but you can't just hope. You have to act. You have to try to inspire the change and be the change. And I really think we see that with Cassian in this episode. He's coming into his own. He's realizing he can be a leader of people. He can inspire an entire group of people to die trying, right? And that's like exactly what he does in Rogue One when he brings all of his men to Scarif with Jyn, and he says to her, I couldn't forgive myself if I gave up now, right? Like, you can draw a straight line from that line in Rogue One to the line in this episode where he says, I'd rather die trying to take them down than die giving them what they want. Like, we'll never have a better chance, right? They'll never have a better chance in Rogue One. Like, this is it. This is all the marbles, right? And so that's why I feel like this episode is a huge inflection point for his character as well as the series and for the rebellion, especially.
Yeah, totally. And it feels like, it goes back to that Jyn quote as well, where she's like, we're going to take all the chances we have until either we win or the chances are spent.
Yes.
And that really becomes the motivating, kind of idea in One Way Out here, because they're just going to keep going without regard of what happens to them individually. I mean, right up front, okay, let's dive into the beginning here. So right up front, we open on like the body of Olaf being put into a body bag and him being rolled out past the night shift, and then Kino and Cassian not really being on the same page about what to do. They're kind of coping in different ways, and Cassian is pushing him a bit, and he doesn't know whether Kino is going to fully commit or not. And they get back to the dorms or like, their cells. And they, and Cassian tells them what's up. And that's kind of what pushes Kino to actually act. And he goes, you play it your way. We're not going to tell the night shift. They'll figure it out soon enough. I'm already a dead man. I'm going to act as I'm already dead. One way out. And that's the power in that, is that it is a selfish action in a way, right? To kind of put yourself in danger, to get out. It is also selfless to forget yourself in that process and saying, I'm not doing this for me. I am doing it for each and every one of us. And if that means that I don't make it out at the end of this, then that's just part of the game. But if it means that at least a couple of us, if some of us, if all of us can make it out, then we have succeeded.
Which makes the end line of I can't swim all the more tragic. I just had my heart ripped out.
That was so brutal. That was so absurdly brutal. And then Cassian gets pushed in, and like the tragedy in that is it hurts. It hurts. It'll never not hurt. I mean, we don't know. I think we can safely assume by the end of this episode that it's possible that the only survivors are Melshi and Cassian, because everybody was kind of going at the same time. However, that might not be true, because it seemed like everybody was kind of fanning outwards. So there may have been multiple places to go, or that they were swimming towards. But it's clear in some ways that not everybody made it. And there's a bit of self-interest in jumping into, or a bit of selfishness, and I don't say that with a negative connotation, of jumping into the ocean, in the sense that you need to be able to float yourself in order to get anywhere. You don't necessarily have the time or the ability to also help somebody who's perhaps weaker or less skilled to do that as well. So, yeah, and well, in a prison breakout specifically.
Well, and that also speaks to Kino's motivations, like you're saying, it's selfless, right? So he's understanding even if nobody helps me, I helped everybody else. Like I don't need anything in return. I did my part. I served my purpose and I feel fulfilled by that. So um I think he's sort of reckoning with that when he realizes he's gonna have to swim and he can't. But also coming to peace with like, okay, this is the end for me, but like look at what I've helped inspire and look at how I've stopped leading a life of inaction and of compliance and being on program to actually showing all these people there is another path to follow. That's pretty motivational for sure. Just to go on a little tangent here, I'm not saying that Kino gets killed by the prison guards. It's possible that maybe Mr. Sheev Palpatine says, "Well, it's a pretty fine specimen we got here.
Stop yourself right now.
He led a whole prison revolt.
Stop.
I might have to put him in a pickle jar in my basement on Exegol. Maybe
No.
maybe name him Snoke. Who knows? We'll never know. One of the mysteries of Star Wars gets deeper and deeper. Kino Loy, could he be Snoke? We are just
No,
memeing.
please stop.
But it's fun. It's fun.
You are just memeing. I want to just jump back and even before the episode begins. And last week I mentioned the music and how it kind of had a very 1970s, 1980s science fiction inspired electronic sound to it. And this music for this week is so much more pensive, but it's also like pensive heroics. I watched it again this morning and was watching it. I felt like, oh, it's bubbling. It's music that's bubbling, like ready to break the surface. And I think it sets such a good tone for this episode. And so I just wanted to make sure to shout that out before we get much further in the episode.
Yeah, it was interesting when we talked to Nicholas Bertel, how he said the intro music sort of takes what we left off on with also like what we're going into. So when we think of Olaf as sort of the point of that music, right? Like the mourning of Olaf, the fact that he's died, but also it gets a little more hopeful at the end of that intro music, right? So it's like, yes, we are mourning, we are sad for the loss of this guy, but also Olaf's loss is going to be the inflection point for these people to wake up and be like, we're not getting out, we have to do something, right? So while we're starting the episode on Arcana 5, let's just kind of walk through the action and the huge exciting moments of the prison breakout, because there's so many of them. And I love how we're getting that morning wake up. This is the last shift number 2155. I don't know if there's any significance to that number, but at least for Cassian, that's his shift number. That's the last one, right? And they walk down the hallway, they go through their morning routine, and this is going to be a morning unlike any other. And once the breakout gets into full effect, it's so exciting, and I love the build up to it. I love how it feels like this could fail even before it starts, right? Like we got to get the pipe burst at the right time. We got to make sure the prison guards don't sense anything and don't send down the elevator. That moment of silence, and you just hear the klaxon blaring and people looking around, and you see the shot of the prison guards looking around. You're like, is it going to happen? Is it going to happen? And finally, when that elevator starts going down, you're like, okay, this is it. This is exciting. We're doing this. We're full in. So I love how the episode builds that tension through, the lack of music and the almost like deafening silence of where they are. Makes you feel a little bit claustrophobic in a sense. Makes your heart race. I think the action was really well directed.
I agree. I feel like the tension is at like a breaking point. Like everybody's quietly looking around each other with a face on their face that's like, oh, oh. And everybody's just on the edge of their seats before the action hits, I think, as an audience at the very least. And once it does hit, it moves really fast and it's thrilling to watch. I don't know if I have a lot of commentary on the action itself other than like it's good and thrilling. And easy to follow too, despite the chaos and the unplannedness, I don't know, of the plan itself. There's a sense that they know kind of the shape of it, but it's clear that they don't actually know, what they are doing. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just a fascinating plan to watch unfold.
Were you getting Rogue One flashbacks as this started happening? Because, some of the people from Table 5 start dying, and you're like, no, not Table 5. I've known you for 2 episodes. No, not the red-haired guy. I felt like every person that got shot, it happened with such, like, intensity. Like, I almost feel like the sound of the blaster got louder when somebody got killed. It almost felt like you felt it every time. You're like, oh, shit. Like, this is bad. Like, a lot of action in Star Wars is so senseless and people just start falling everywhere. But I feel like every person that got shot or every person that died in this episode, you really felt it.
Well, I think that's a huge props to the sound design, because it's really a conversation about like what sounds to use, what sounds not to use. We talked in early episodes about the power of the TIE fighter sound, which is used so sparingly. But when it is, it's like, whoa, that's scary. That's scary. It feels the same way for these blasters. This is not a show that is relying on even the nostalgic and classic sounds of Star Wars, both in the score or in the sound design. With some of the things that we know and associate so strongly with Star Wars. So when they do pop out, they're really powerful, and because they give us that sense of familiarity, that sense of recognition, but they're used so sparingly that it feels important.
Mm-hmm. And that first push up the elevator is the scariest part of the episode because they have the lower ground. They're defenseless completely, right? Like they're throwing their tools at the guards. How do they get past that, right? And it's obviously when they try shocking the floors, and the water is what basically shorts the fuse. And I love Andy Serkis yelling attack, like that's a good Andy Serkis moment in a Star Wars. I love that. Like it's so good.
Well, the moment he realizes that the floors are not active is a really powerful one too, because um, it's that sense of fear, that sense of really really strong fear and obedience that is built into them because of this floor system, and because of the fact that they're not being guarded so heavily, that like this is their form of punishment, that the relief, like the amount of relief that I think we as an audience member get when we find we recognize that the floor is not active is really powerful, and I think really allows us to invest in the escape plan even more.
Well, yeah, and it shows how powerful fear as a motivator was for those prisoners. And
Oh, 100%, yeah.
once you take that out of the equation, these are all brave people. These are people who are willing to do whatever's necessary. So take that out, and the prison guards get overwhelmed very easily. I love Cassian doing his little kick. Kicks the guy in the leg and then takes his blaster and like shoots. And then there's that one shot where the guy's at the console and he gets shot by Cassian, and Cassian's like in the doorway, like a James Bond, like at the end of the like at the end of like the tunnel thing. I was like, oh, that's a spicy shot. I was like, I kind of like that. That was interesting. I was just like, I don't know. You don't see, again, like every episode of Andor, I go, ooh, it's kind of interesting. It's kind of interesting cinematography right there.
For sure, for sure.
I love when they get out of that area and start liberating other levels of the prison. Melshi gets to one part and pulls a switch, which was giving me, Melshi Master Switch vibes.
It's kind of brutal, honestly.
Having flashbacks, But, he has his moment. They're running around the tunnels, which it kind of felt a little Bespany to me with all the white walls and shooting down hallways. But we eventually get to the command center on level 8. And I think this is one of the best parts of the episode, because this is the voice of God, the guy who's been giving the orders to be on program and directing all these prisoners. And it's just this like weaselly guy who is sitting in his ivory tower. It's so interesting how there's not necessarily any cameras in this room. We talked about the panopticon and the idea of like everybody's feeling watched at any moment, but there are actually no cameras in here. It's simply just like dots on a screen, like illustrating the volume of prisoners and where they're moving and where they're located.
It's like a heat map, or like they were all tracked.
Yeah. And so there's almost a sense of distance between like these are actual people And for him, it's just like,
Right.
oh, this is just a heat map on a screen, and I can just move the heat where I want to, and I can chop off parts I don't want. The amount of desensitization this guy has to just kill anybody on a whim is horrible.
Yeah, there's a sense that he just like is so nonchalant about it. Like he's like, cut off 5, fry everybody on 5.
Yeah.
You know,
hmm
Eh, and you're like, oh, okay, you're just 3 guys sitting in a room, not giving a single shit about the humanity of anybody else, or even recognizing that those people are human. You're ready to kill 100 men in one go.
Right.
You know, like it was a bit jarring, as I assume it was meant to be. It really showed the callousness of the empire, and even of these, quote unquote everyday Imperials, who otherwise, aren't masterminds, but really do the work every day to forward the fascist regime.
hmm What was your reaction when you saw the door open and in come Cassian and Kino Loy? Like, did you feel like this was going to be a huge moment? Like, what did you think of that scene in general and the way that they command that center immediately? And also just, again, this voice of God having to confront the people who he's been affecting directly, in the way that immediately they're cowards, right? Like their backs are against the wall. They're willing to do whatever they tell them to do, because they have no
Yeah, because
backbone.
yeah, and they're coming from a place of selfish preservation. Like,
hmm
okay, I don't have any real conviction here. I just don't kill me.
And no true loyalty to the Empire either, in any sense, right? I feel
Yeah,
like,
but I mean, yeah, I'm totally there, but it's selfish preservation,
yeah,
but even though they don't necessarily have loyalty to the empire, they're still carrying out these terrible acts in the name of the empire, and just as bad as anybody else.
yeah, absolutely. The moment Kino takes control of the voice of God and starts talking to the prisoners, it was giving Snoke. Like,
To you, I
no,
watched it
I'm just
again and I was
saying,
like, it is not giving Snoke to me.
no. I'm just saying, obviously Andy Serkis has such a distinctive voice. So when you hear Andy Serkis's voice through the modulator of the voice of God and like how it sounds to the other prisoners, it sounded like Snoke. It was like, one way out. And I'm like, oh, I was like, that's just interesting. It's not anything like, I'm not trying to create any Snoke theories. I just think
you
it's fascinating how his voice is just so distinctive, right? Like you can hear it a little bit.
you already gave a Snoke theory in this
I know.
episode, so don't be like, I'm not here to give my Snoke theories. Like, come on, come on. You literally spent time at the top of this episode giving us a Snoke theory. Um, you had told me before we watched this episode, um, you said, Sarah, there's a monologue, and I was like, ah, shit, okay. Cool. I love a monologue. So I get into this episode, I'm watching, and I'm like, wow, Andy Serkis monologue, killing it. And then I watched 20 more minutes of the episode, and here comes Luthen Rail with his monologue. And then I was like, oh, this is the monologue you were talking about. There are 2 of them.
Andor's like, why not just one scrap? How about two? How about 2 scraps of excellence for you today on this Wednesday morning? Star Wars fans, you deserve it. Double the fun.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I really felt like I did deserve it. Honestly, I was like, wow, God is blessing me today, or the maker is blessing me today. Whatever entity you believe in. It's like maybe we've done something okay in this world that we get these performances from these actors.
Yeah. This moment, I think, is a huge changing point for Cassian. Like, it's all been building to this. Aldani, Barracks, and now in Arkina Phi. Like, this is the moment when Cassian realizes he can fight for something larger than himself, right? Like, we talk about self-preservation. I think Cassian's been living a life of self-preservation. And this is the moment where he goes, okay, it's not just about me. Like, it's about the whole. It's about the larger group. It's about a bigger cause, right? Luthen telling him, in the first couple episodes, don't you want to like fight for something bigger? Like, don't you want to put a stick in the eye of the Empire? And this is where he's seeing that. Kino tells the entire prison they don't have enough guards and they know it. If we wait till they figure that out, it'll be too late. And he looks at Cassian and echoes his earlier lines, I'd rather die trying to take them out than die giving them what they want. And there's this moment of recognition from Cassian that goes, oh, those are the words I recited earlier. And now Kino is using those words to inspire an entire prison to charge one way out and chant these words and get to the top of the prison and escape. And so for Cassian, he's realizing, oh shit, I can be a leader. I can inspire people. I'm good at this. Like I think this is really the moment where he's gonna figure it out and think about maybe joining the rebellion or taking Luthen up on his offer to not just do the one job in Aldhani, but say like, do you got any more jobs for me? What else can I do to help your cause? And I think that's where the series is going at this point. But what did you think of like Kino choosing Cassian's words and what that means for Cassian and the idea of his capacity for leadership?
It's so interesting that you mention it in this way because I hadn't really considered that while watching and how Kino adapting Cassian's language in his speech could inspire him in this way. I think that every mission that he's gone on, everything that he's experienced since the beginning of the show starting, has further and further radicalized him towards the rebellion and kind of ignited his passion a little bit more each time. But I really think that I think every week I feel like I'm like, oh yeah, this is the inciting incident for Cassian. This is the inciting incident for Cassian. But like, I really think this is what's going to spur him to take capital A action in the name of the rebellion. And it's really interesting that Melshi is going to be alongside him for that. And that makes a certain amount of sense to me that that's where we're going to be going in episodes 11 and 12. But it makes me wonder if anybody else did survive or if they'll meet up with anybody else or if it'll be them against the world a bit.
Yeah, I think when we talk about the inciting incident for Cassian, this is definitely the one, or at least the most significant one, the one that has the most pull for him. I love the fact too that we end with him and Melshi running off. You see some of the searchlight helicopter things in the background, so they're already looking for escapees, which is interesting. Like, how are they going to
I noticed that.
navigate that in future episodes? But I love the fact that Cassian is no longer alone on his journey. He has somebody by his side. I love how he tells Melshi, whatever happens next, we made it. Right. So it's kind of like, hey, even if we jump off here and we die in the ocean, like at least we died as free men. Right. Like we didn't die inside these like white sterile walls, doing one job over and over and over again. Like we gained back our freedom, right?
Sure.
I'm excited to see what the journey ahead looks like with Melshi by his side, and I do wonder where these final 2 episodes are going. I think we're going back to Ferrix most likely because there's a lot of unresolved conflict there between Marva and Bix and Brasso, and also Cinta being there. So it feels like all of that is going to come to some sort of explosive head. But how does Cassian convince Melshi to go to his home planet and like that it is safe, even though there is obviously an Imperial presence there? Like, will Melshi agree? Like, is Melshi like, no, I want to stay as far away from the Empire as possible? Or is Melshi sort of in the mindset of like, yeah, let's stick it to him. Let's show him what we got. Like, we just escaped prisons and we're ready to bring the fire wherever we can, right? So it'll just be interesting, and I'm excited that they're together now because we know in Rogue One that they are like ride or dies, basically. Cassian tells Melshi to light it up at Scarif, and he's the one to start exploding the transports all around. when Krennic gives his iconic line, "Are we blind? Deploy the garrison."
Are we blind? Yeah. And I you bring up an interesting point, I think, in the speculation realm, because it makes me wonder whether I agree with you that Ferrix is really unresolved at this point, and we get a little piece of Ferrix here. Marva is rejecting her meds. Cinta's kind of on the hunt. But there's no resolution to that storyline. And the question becomes, yes, we're going to go back to Ferrix, but does the Ferrix storyline conclude with Cassian or without Cassian. So in the sense of like, is it something that Marva and Bix and Brasso are spurring in their community, or does Cassian come back and wreak some havoc again? And that's how that happens. I think that'll be really, really interesting to find out. That was a good point that you made.
One final note on the prison escape as well. I do love the bird's eye view of the prison that we get, and the prison almost looks like the Imperial logo. And we see
totally.
all the prisoners sort of swimming out at the top corner, and how they're almost like spreading out. I just thought that was like a really interesting image because it almost made me think of, it almost had the effect of like a bullet, like when a bullet gets shot through something and the blood kind of splatters out. It almost looked like that. Like the Imperial logo is like almost bleeding out, or the Empire is bleeding out. And so like I kind of viewed it as like, oh, this prison revolt, like these people is like another splinter in the foot of the Empire, right? It's like another pocket of fomenting, right?
Right. And
I just thought that was interesting.
And that imagery is totally intentional too. We were talking last week about, I don't know if we talked about it too much on the podcast, but we talked about it off air and on Twitter about how that one doorway that Mom Mothma walks through looks or resembles or kind of gives the feeling of the Rebel logo. And everybody had different thoughts on how the Rebel logo would be positioned or placed within that shape, but it definitely had that kind of circular flowing, in a sense, shape to the Rebel logo. And this episode does the exact opposite with the Imperial logo and with explicitly what the prison looks like. And there's no way that is all coincidental in a show like this, especially.
Yeah, the filmmakers are very intentional with every choice they make. So I love that imagery, and I love the music that plays over it, because it's basically saying like, hey, there is hope. Like there are people in the world who are gonna give it their all, like these people and like Cassian and like Kino Loy. So if we just can string together those people, like how Luthen says, I need all the heroes I can get, right? And it flips over to Melshi and Cassian, like those are the heroes he needs. Because look at what they've done on Narkina 5. So it's just like it's an inflection point for Cassian, but it's just also an inflection point for hope in the galaxy, and the fact that like hope will survive and it will lead to a new hope. And how do we get there is the big question. And this is just the start. So speaking of other agents of rebellion, let's hop over to Mom Mothma and like her sacrifice here, because she finally meets Dulvin Davo Skulden is his name.
Davo Skulden. And like the way that his name was name dropped last week, we're like, Davo Skulden, I'm supposed to know that name. The answer is no, but you are now, because he shows up in her house and he's a piece of shit. And he's like, he comments on Coruscant and her home, and then he is willing to finance her charitable fund if he is invited to return with his 14-year-old son to meet her 13-year-old daughter, Leda. Man, how did this make you feel as a person in the world?
Very angry, very angry. It's the misogyny of it all. Like this tradition on Chandrilla is one that Mothma does not support. Davo says sometimes our position makes decisions for us. Neither of us have lived a life that encourages nonconformity, which is ironic because obviously she is totally living a life of nonconformity, because the entire essence of the rebellion is nonconformity, right? So I think that is very interesting how she says she's not considering it, and he's like, that's the first time you've lied in this entire conversation. So that shows how well she's hiding her true intentions and what she's doing behind the scenes, first off. But yeah,
she's bad omens. It's bad omens. Gives me bad vibes. Not her, kicking him out and saying, no, I'm not considering it, but just the fact that he's able to read that and be like, no, you are.
Yeah. Well, it echoes back to when Luthen told her, if you're not willing to sacrifice your conscience, like give up now, fold in. Like we all got to make sacrifices, right? And so the big question now is Mothma willing to marry off her daughter to this wealthy scum of the earth businessman in order to advance the rebel cause? Because we know how much she dislikes this tradition. She does not support it. She wishes she probably didn't have to have been a part of it as well.
Yeah, I mean that's the kind of key thing that I'm thinking about when I watched this episode again was, you know, her when he suggests this, she immediately is incredibly defensive. She shuts him down, literally kicks him out of her home.
Right.
What is her story? Was Mon herself? We kind of have been told and kind of have inferred that, you know, her and Tay Kolma had some sort of relationship when they were kids. Was it like a romantic relationship in their teens before she married Perrin? You know, I don't know if we know the answer to that 100%, but I think that's something that's easy to infer. But was Mon married off in the same way or paired up in the same way?
Mhm.
Is there a story behind beyond her just not agreeing with or liking the tradition? Is there a story behind why this suggestion um, riles her in this particular way towards like being so defensive about it? I wonder if her family set her up in this way too, and she doesn't want to pass that down to her daughter. But it seems like that might not be. It might be a non-choice for her, if that makes sense. Um, you know, it might be just what she has to do. So I don't know. I don't know. I'm really fascinated by that. But also earlier in the conversation, when Devo walks into the home and is immediately like, "Oh, you know, I've only been here once before. I thought I'd be coming back a bunch, but no." And Mon goes, "Well, it's state property. The choices on decor are limited." He's like, "Oh, it's a bit antiquated," or I don't know what he says specifically, but you know, it's out of date. And I just thought that was a really bold and loud statement on how literally everything in Mon's life is not hers, and she doesn't have any control over it. Like the only thing that she has control over is her participation in the rebellion, because um, she doesn't even get a choice of what her home looks like, you know, what her husband's doing, what her daughter's doing, um her role as a senator. Like there's a real lack of choice in that, and I think that is reflected when Devo makes his proposition about his son and her daughter. And then I also think that's reflected uh in a very kind of sideways way when we go to Luthen's, you know, shop, and then there is a Padme's headdress or a version of the Naboo queen headdress. Because then I was thinking to myself, oh well, um, Padme was what 14 when she was elected queen of Naboo. So there's something about a loss of youth, being stuck, uh, an early maturity into womanhood, um, that that is being hinted at or touched or conversed about. I think in this episode, in particular.
Yeah, as much as we talk about sacrifice, I think choice is a huge idea integrated into Mon's story. And I think Mon is a character who is having her choice stripped away and has had her choice stripped away from her. And here we have this man who is like a drop of discomfort, maybe the price of doing business. And it's so insulting for him to say that, you know, like a drop of discomfort, really minimizing the impact of what he's proposing, right? Like to him, it's a drop and he's going to benefit from her discomfort. He's going to be the one that, yes, I'm married now to the senator from Chandrilla, and my family is going to reap the benefits of wealth as part of this partnership. Like my son will reap those benefits, marrying
Well,
a
it's
wealthy
not even
daughter.
wealth. Well, it's not even wealth because he's the one with the wealth.
Hmm.
David's the banker guy. You know, he's the one that has access to wealth. Mon has the access to status.
Status, yeah, yeah.
You know, like, because she's the galactic senator. Her family has not just a ranking within Chandrilla, but a ranking within the galaxy. So there's like a huge status upgrade that I think comes along with that. And I think that's why she's part of the reason why she's so deeply offended. Um, you know, because otherwise he has it all in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And the way that she reacts when he walks out of the room, like really just chilling performance by Genevieve O'Reilly, and the way that she's trying to catch her breath and she's shaking and she's very distraught by this proposal. And I can't help but think she's considering the ways in which her life changed because her choice was taken away from her. And is she willing to pass that off to her daughter and take her daughter's choice away? Do the ends justify the means? Like, these are things that she's going to have to weigh, right? Like, the Empire takes away the choice of civilizations and of people and of societies. Will she do that on a very personal level with her own family? And how does that make her feel? And how does she weigh that choice if she makes it, right? So I don't know if she will or if she won't. That is going to drastically affect the way that we see Mon Mothma either way. And I'm very excited to see like what her decision is, because it has huge ramifications.
Oh, totally. I fear learning what she'll choose. Because I worry for Leda, who again, only 14 or 13. I worry for Mon. I don't know. I worry for everybody right now.
Andor. I worry for everybody right now. That's like the show's slogan.
Honestly, I do.
Yeah. One final thought too. I hate how he says one of the indulgences of great wealth is the freedom from other people's opinions. I mean, this guy has said like some pretty terrible things throughout this conversation, but this is definitely one of them.
He says money solves capital E everything.
Yeah. So he represents the capitalist pigs of our world, right? Like people who have just hoarded wealth and think that can elevate them to some new level where they are free from consequence and free from public discourse and free from criticism, and they exist on a different playing field altogether than the rest of the lower people of society. So I think he's just a terrible person. I'm hoping that terrible personality outweighs any benefit to the Rebel Alliance and Mon decides not to marry her daughter off. But I will be interested to see if she talks to Leda about it and like what Leda says and like what her thought is in all of this, right? Because we haven't heard a lot from Leda, and I feel like that's going to come to a head at some point. I don't know. She's just been sort of like dropped in certain moments throughout the series so far. I feel like there is a big thing that's going to happen with her at some point.
I think that's a possibility, but I also think that it's a possibility that she is just, and I mean this in the sense of the story and not and in the writing and not in the sense of like her actual character, but I do think that in some ways like she is more of a game piece in the context of this show than potentially like an actual player.
Yeah.
I don't know how much more how much more time we could theoretically spend with her to get to know her, to entertain like a conversation like that. As much as I would find it, I think, incredibly interesting. I don't know.
Part of me hopes that Leda is actually like a rebel at heart and she just hasn't come out about it yet, so I don't know. There is going to be something, whether she maybe turns Mon in or tries to ruin Mon, or maybe she joins Mon. I don't know. It'd be interesting. Or is something that happens with her daughter really the catalyst for Mon to go full blown rebel? Is there some sort of inciting incident for her as well around her daughter that causes like her to leave politics and just become the face of the rebellion? So it's interesting for sure. But as much as we're talking about Mon, I think we should wrap up the conversation with Luthen. Luthen,
yeah, totally.
Stellan Skarsgård is the standout of this episode for sure. I love that we start with Lonnie, who's from the ISB Council, and we saw talking to Deidre Miro and Partagas in the beginning of the episode when they, capture Anton Krieger's pilot or the vessel, and they're kind of laying the trap for Anton or Anto Krieger. And Lonnie offers up a solution about how they should inspect the ship to make sure nothing seems out of the ordinary, because that's what they would do. And seeing him go through the underbelly of Coruscant to meet with Luthen is interesting. It's cool that we're bringing in an ISB double agent this far into the series. I love that they didn't show those cards too early. I think it's a compelling story to now bring up. Again, when we think about the ideas of sacrifice, and we learn Lonnie has been working in the ISB for 6 years, going up through the ranks, and that's a long game. That is a very long game. What did you make of this conversation with these two?
Well, we know that this game is much longer than we ever thought it was. You mentioned the 6 years, but Luthen says that I wake up every day to an equation I wrote 15 years ago. So this is something for Luthen that's been in motion for a really long time, a really long time. And he's been putting the pieces in place, piece by piece, very slowly, in the hopes that something will come of it. And now it seems like something's about to come of it. I can't get over with this whole thing. Bluetooth spy is what I'm calling Lonnie, because he gets into that elevator and he grabs like a Bluetooth earpiece and puts it in his ear. And I was like, LOL. And I know it's like the dumbest piece of commentary ever, but like, that's what stuck out to me in a very superficial sense. But I think it's interesting where, Lonnie doesn't agree with what's happening in the ISB. Obviously, that's why he's a part of the growing rebellion, and he like struggles a lot with that. But he's ready to get out. He's ready to be done. Like he feels a lot of stress and a lot of pressure, and I find that to be interesting. He's like, well, I'm a parent now. I don't want to be a part of this. And Luthen like flips it on his head and is like, well, he kind of has the bargaining chip, knowing about his daughter, and also being able to hang that above his head a little bit. I just think it's a very interesting situation in which Luthen is leveraging his power and his knowledge in order to manipulate somebody, to keep somebody in the rebellion. And I think that goes back to my note about like, wow, Luthen is ruthless, because he's unafraid to say things like that. But it's also like his ruthlessness extends to his plans in their entirety, if that makes sense.
When he says, we've been grooming you for too long, I mean, he's
Right.
just outright saying it at that point. Like you are a piece of my puzzle, and I will keep you in line. Like you're kind of trapped at this point, whether you like it or not. And I hate to say that, I think about you constantly, but like that's just how it is.
Gosh,
That's how it has to be.
Constantly is so weird, and a little messed up. It's in the way that that's phrased to Lonnie, I feel. I don't disagree with like Luthen's message and Luthen's goals. He's rather ruthless about the way that he's going to make that happen, which he explicitly discusses. I've given up all chance at inner peace. What does Luthen give up? Okay, he goes calm, kindness, kinship, love. I've given up all chance at inner peace. I've made my mind a sunless space. I share my dreams with ghosts. I wake up every day to an equation I wrote 15 years ago, from which there's only one conclusion. I'm damned for what I do. My anger, my ego, my unwillingness to yield, my eagerness to fight, for which there's no escape. I yearned to be a savior against injustice without contemplating the cost, and by the time I looked down, there was no longer any ground beneath my feet. What is my sacrifice? I am condemned to use the tools of my enemy to defeat them. I burn my decency for someone else's future. I burn my life to make a sunrise I know I'll never see. The ego that started this fight will never have a mirror or an audience or the light of gratitude. So what do I sacrifice? Everything.
Oh man!
And let us clap for Beau Willimon. And ready and
clap. Holy shit, man! That was. There's so much baked into that monologue there. So much to dive into, and you understand the weight of Luthen's sacrifice. And when you think of Luthen's ruthlessness, this puts it in a new light. I think Luthen is somebody who doesn't want to be ruthless, but understands he has to be, right? Like, I think there's a double meaning behind I think about you constantly. It's like, yes, I think about you constantly because at my heart, I don't want this for you. But then unfortunately, I need this for you. I need this from you. I need you to do these things for me because otherwise there's no moving forward with the cause. Burning his future for or burning his decency for somebody else's future. Like, he understands, like, he's got to get to the Empire's level in order to defeat them. Like, he's got to use those tools. He's willing to sacrifice Anto Krieger. He says in the conversation to Lonnie, like, if that's what has to happen, that's what has to happen. If that's, if Anto Krieger is a martyr, so be it. Because that's more important. That the inspiration and the motivator is more important than the people.
Right. And I think that really illuminates his point of view quite strongly, as he's willing to sacrifice Anto Krieger in front of another one of his people and be like, this is just part of playing the game. Like, this is just part of what we do. And I think that's really difficult to wrap your head around at times. But I don't know. I just think this is his performance in the scene, this entire scene, the fact that he's standing on a railless bridge. Make note that he is on a railless bridge. We all know what happens on railless bridges. It's not good. Obviously, nothing of that sort happens here, but it was ominous. It was spooky. But
it's a bit threatening too to Lonnie. It's like, come out and confront me. Like, I dare you. I dare you to,
Right. But this speech is a work of freaking art. It is some of the best speechifying I have ever seen. I have never been so shooketh to my core with a monologue. Maybe with the exception of some Shakespeare, because he's got some delicious lines. But like, this is so good. And Beau Willimon just wrote some insane stuff here. I made my mind a sunless space. I share my dreams with ghosts. There's such weight to every one of those words. And I think that I don't know if I have anything more to say about like the content of the scene, but like, I just was so immensely impressed with this scene and Stellan Skarsgård's delivery of these incredible lines of dialogue.
Truly one of the most powerful performances of any Star Wars project. You put this up with Andy Serkis as Kino Loy as well. I mean, you're just getting two powerhouses.
And they're in the same episode. Two delicious monologues in the same episode. Who does that? It's not even the final one. It's not even the main character that's saying them. It's got me messed up. It, like, dramatically, it's got me messed up.
It really paints Luthen as a tragic character as well. He is somebody who is trapped. He tells Lonnie, you're trapped, but really Luthen is the one that's trapped here, right? He's probably done so many bad things. He can't even count them at this point. And it makes me think of Cassian in his speech to Jyn. Like, we've all done terrible things on behalf of the rebellion, like spies, saboteurs, assassins, right? And so,
right.
We're not only getting a look at the life of Luthen, but also like the life that Cassian is going to eventually turn to, and like why he feels so haunted in Rogue One, like why he's willing to kill his friend right in the beginning of Rogue One, right? Like, he is going to embrace this mentality. Like, this is a mirror into the life of what Cassian's going to choose very soon here, right? Like, Cassian is going to burn his life, literally, like the Death Star firing on Scarif. He's going to burn his life to make a sunrise he'll never see, right? Him and Jyn Erso do that. They're going to be consumed by that fire. Mm-hmm. That's the idea of sacrifice. It's doing things for the greater good, not for yourself. And that is, like, again, the tragedy of the rebellion in Star Wars is like, it's all these everyday people fighting this fight and not knowing if they'll ever see the path ahead, like the better future. But they continue doing it anyways. Like, they continue fighting that fight no matter what, because like, they understand a better future for everybody is more important than just a future for myself.
Right.
And sometimes that's taken to the extreme, and you got to do some terrible things in the Star Wars galaxy to make that happen because you're facing some of the most oppressive forces imaginable.
Yeah. I agree with you. I think that, this selflessness and um this whole thing, it is kind of the epitome of rebellion in its truest sense.
But also, something that is inspiring as well is like he says that he sacrificed calm, kinship, love, and kindness. I will say, as much as this does get to some essence of what it means to be a rebel, I think there are also a lot of ways in which future rebels will defy the things that Luthen thought he had to give up in order to
Hmm.
make that rebellion happen. Because I think Luthen's obviously very extreme in his methods, right? But people like Luke Skywalker and Leia and Han Solo, I think those three people show that calm, kindness, kinship, and love can also be as important to the rebellion as like your anger and your ego and your unwillingness to yield. Like, yes, those are all important things and you have to be brave in the face of evil, but like also love does ignite the stars and love can save the galaxy and be a huge motivator for people. So you don't necessarily have to give up those things in the process, but I think Luthen making the choice to give up those things to set his life on one path and one path only is, again, tragic, and also very interesting. Just I want to know more about his character and his path. But do you kind of also
Mhm.
see like just the future rebels like defying a little bit of his statement here?
I think that's an incredible point that you make because yes, because when you look at a character like Rose, um, wow, I just really had to bring Rose into this conversation about Andor.
Perfect,
But like
love it.
it is compassion is what guides her. And it is grief guides her, compassion is what guides her. She never loses her sense of kindness, her sense of selflessness, and selfless love and empathy to the people around her. And like that's why she saves Finn in the end of Last Jedi. Um, and I think that that motivating factor even comes into the final battle in the Rise of Skywalker. I mean, we ultimately see what connects Rey and Kylo. Is this connection that they have with one another, and ultimately like an affection that they have for each other. And he kind of is brought to her side at the end of that story, um, because they're able to see on the same page and see with a certain sense of empathy.
Right, and it's what brings Luke to his father's side in Return of the Jedi. It's love. It's love of his father and a willingness to see the
Right.
good in him,
Right.
and that's
Yeah.
literally what saves the galaxy is love. So that definitely is just again, it's interesting that Luthen gave up those things in order to start the rebellion. Um, but as we know, those things don't have to continue to be given up. I think laying the groundwork is much harder than we probably even understand, and like what Luthen has had to do. So in some sense, he's a trailblazer for what's required to be a rebel. But in other senses, he is not the only example, and that's not the only methodology you have to follow in order to be a rebel. Again, like everybody has their own form of rebellion.
Sure, sure, sure. And I think that's reflected too in what we see in later stories where the factions of the rebellion. There are different factions of the rebellion. They have splintered because they have different outlooks on what they should be doing, how they should be acting, and even what goal they're going for. So like, there's definitely different paths of resistance, um, and Luthen, I think, made a necessary choice in order to get things going for himself and for the rebellion. But it's going to be clear, I think, in the coming years to these characters, the ways in which they actually do differ.
Absolutely. Well, I'm so excited for whatever's next on the series. I think the last two episodes are going to be explosive and just groundbreaking. I feel like I think they're directed by Tony Gilroy, and I forget who was writing the last few episodes. He might be writing the last few episodes. I'm kind of blanking honestly at this point. I cannot wait how the story wraps up for season one, and then having to wait for season two is going to be brutal. I'm getting kind of sad that we're nearing the end, but very
Yeah.
excited for what's ahead. So, with that being said, Sarah, did you have any final thoughts? Did you want to get into our Andors quick here, and then we'll wrap up?
Yeah. So I wanted to note that the time grappler, When we go back to Ferrex, we kind of start to get some of the time grappling time sounds, and I was like, ah, yes, I love that this is the sound of Ferrex. I made me feel very at home. I love that. And then also I realized I think in this episode that the cells, maybe I mentioned this last episode, I don't know, but the cells are shared. I think because like there's a day shift and then a night shift and then they switch. So I don't think there's like any sense of actual independent privacy in the prison. Just an observation.
I don't think I have any other odds and ends, but I do have my ands for our Andor segment, which is
I've got an and an or. I'm ready.
Perfect. Yeah. So these are Andor is our segment where we say two things we liked, X and Y, and then a situational question, which is X or Y. So with that being said, Sarah, what's your ands for this week?
My and is Luthen and Kino or Stellan and Andy. I'm just here for the monologues, baby.
Oh my gosh, Sarah, we have the same.
We have the same.
Wow. Because my and was Andy Serkis and Stellan Skarsgård.
Wow.
Same brain cell operating at full capacity this morning.
Yeah. Look at us. After this very difficult, very tiring, very early morning record, we had a bit of a Nico Nirvana here.
Yeah.
Even though it wasn't Nico, you know?
Yeah.
We just had a moment. That was so beautiful. I'm so glad that we could have that.
I just never thought when we would start watching Andor by the end of season 1, we'd be like, yeah, our two favorite performances are Stellan Skarsgård and Andy Serkis. Like, what? Like, what are we watching?
We should mention there's no Cyril in this episode. I bet you he's at home crying. So we should give him his privacy at this time.
Or he's at Deidre's workplace being a effing creep. Lurking in the shadows. So he's one of two. He's one of two places.
Maybe his mom is giving him extra bowls of the crunchy cereal so he can cope. Okay.
Pathetic loser. Yes, go ahead.
If you are escaping from an Imperial prison, would you rather have to escape into swimming or running?
Oh my God. Oh man, this is just terrible. This is terrible. I would say running, because when you swim, you have to use your arms and your legs. At least if you're running, your legs tire. And at least, you still have your arms to fight off some people, if you need to. So I would choose running.
I would choose swimming. I feel like you're gonna work your whole body, yes, but you can hide in the water if necessary. And also, I don't like to sweat. So that as a sport, growing up, I realized that I don't enjoy sweating, and that swimming was a great sport for me because you're just entirely wet. You can't even, if you are sweating, you can't feel it because you're just damp.
That's true. That's a good point. That is a good point.
And I feel like I would move faster at a faster pace over time swimming than running. My mile time is not very good. Let's just say that.
I'm a terrible runner. So I don't even know why I'm choosing running. I used to be on the swim team, so I probably should have chose swimming, but we'll try it out. We'll just try it out. If I get shot in the back, it's fine. Whatever. I tried. At least I died trying, to Cassian's point. Okay. So my does Kino Loy get pickled, or does he not get pickled?
He does not get pickled. End of conversation, please. Dear God. You're like, I'm not here to do my Snoke theory. And then you're like, here are 3 times I'm going to bring up Snoke.
Listen, we didn't see a body. Actually, my real question though is, did he swim or did he not try to swim? Do you think he just ended up jumping?
I don't know. I really don't. I don't know if I have an opinion on that.
Because it's almost like, death in there or death out there. And I just don't know. I don't know like where Kino's mind is and what he decides. And I also like that it does keep it ambiguous, because it makes us think and it makes us wonder what does happen to him. So a tragic end for Kino Loy. I wish he was more part of the rebellion, but alas.
But alas, we don't want to have too much Andy Serkis. Like it might lose the novelty and the deliciousness of Andy Serkis.
He's like wasabi. You have to do little increments of Andy Serkis, not too much, or it gets
Not
too spicy.
we love Andy Serkis. Have not a bad word to say about Andy Serkis at all. But we don't want to overuse Andy Serkis.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just too good. He's just too good.
Well, with that being said, that wraps up our episode today on One Way Out. So episode number 10, we got 2 more on the horizon, and then we're done with season 1 of Andor.
We still have 2 more.
Yeah, what a blessing. 12 episodes. I love it. I can't wait until we're back next week talking episode 11, and we do have some guests scheduled for next week. We haven't had any of these last 2 episodes since we got the episodes early, so we just wanted to record them on our own. But with that being said, if you want to hear more from us here at Andor Candor on Friends of the Force, you can follow us on our socials on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube, as well as Sarah and I on Twitter, Letterboxd, and Goodreads to see what we're reading, what we're watching, and what we're saying. And also, if you'd be so kind, leave us a 5-star rating wherever you listen to the show. Helps other folks find the show, join the Andor discussion, and continue being a part of the rebellion. I also love Luthen's line to Lonnie, "You've made your sacrifice to the rebellion is epic." That's how I feel.
Oh, I didn't mention that, but God, what a weird word to hear in Star Wars. I don't know if I enjoyed that. I don't know if I enjoyed that. I'll be honest with you. That was kind of odd.
That's how I feel every time I watch Rogue One, I watch Andor, or I talk about Andor or Rogue One. I feel like my sacrifice to the rebellion is epic. For the 100th time watching Rogue One, it's so epic. That's my form of sacrifice, my time.
I'm gonna hop back on our outro. Okay. We also have a Patreon. We're tiers start at just $1. And as always, we are very, very truly grateful to all of our patrons who helped make the show happen, to help keep the lights on for our show. So thank you very much. They are Amy, Brian with an I, Brian with a Y, Cheryl, Clay, Danny, Davis, Dylan, Huang, Jen, Knights of Ren, Leanne, Levi, Lucy, Lindsay, Randy, Rob, Saber Bouquet, Sky Talkers, Stephen, Travis, Tom, and our newest patron, Santa. Thank you all so very much, and thank you to everybody who takes the time out of their day to listen to any of our episodes. It means the world to us. We're really glad that you can join in this conversation with us. Please reach out to us. We'd love to know what's up. So tell us if you enjoyed an episode or what you're having for breakfast.
Hopefully it's crunchies. Yeah.
Hopefully it's crunchies. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, once again, thank you all for listening. And until next week, may the Force be with you always.